Yes, so we're all here to talk about the new film Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. That's the last time I'm going to give that full title because that is a mouthload. But yeah, written by Christina Hodson and directed by Kathy Yang. Yeah, so obviously, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about particular details in the film, and yeah, so if you haven't seen it, probably want to watch that first, or if you don't care about spoilers, like Gina, stick with us. So before I get into a recap of the story, let me just get some quick takes and impressions of the film from everyone, and yeah, we'll get into it. So what did you all think?
Okay, well, I'm quite a big fan of the Batman universe and Harley Quinn and things like that in general. So it's a film where, like, it had both reasonably high expectations to live up to for me because it's got some characters I love in it, but also I felt that Suicide Squad was kind of a hot mess. So I sort of went into the cinema without knowing what I was really gonna get for my 15 quid. And I guess the short version of it is I didn't feel robbed, but I don't think I would buy the Blu-ray. I think that's like the shortest way of summarizing what I enjoyed
Okay, that does say a
myself.
lot.
Yeah, I enjoyed myself, but I don't think it has masses of rewatchability.
Interesting.
Yeah. What do you
I'm
think, Tazziii?
I'm gonna go with like quite an opposite take on it, but then also coming into it from sort of like the opposite way, I guess, because I don't read comics. Big confession. I've only read a few, and I used to love Batman like cartoons, but I've never like properly followed any stories because when I was younger, I did not follow anything like in the order it should be followed. So I just like the characters from my sort of way of interacting with them. My impressions of this film was fun, which I think if you don't come out of a film that's mainly about Harley Quinn and you don't think fun, then it's the wrong film. And like I was quite impressed. I feel like it could have been. I feel like it tiptoed a little bit, but I plan on getting the Blu-ray.
Okay, so we've got one Blu-ray sale. Cool. All right. I'm going to put a question mark on the Blu-ray. I think I will lean more towards Bex, and so I also think Suicide Squad was a hot mess. That was a terrible film, and yeah, I mean this was better, but that's no bar, really. But I enjoyed it, so I also came out thought yeah that was fun. I felt it started a little disjointed. Not sure how long, but there was a point where I lost a bit of focus in terms of like whose film is this? A lot of jumping around, and then it got to a point where it brought some focus, sort of plot wise, in terms of we knew, what was at stake. We knew who was on what side and everything, and then what the kind of goal was. And I was like, okay, now I'm sort of on board, and sort of got to a point where I kind of, I guess, accepted it for the film it was, and then just enjoyed the ride while I was on it, if that makes sense. So I enjoyed it. I've heard varying reactions. Case in point, last 5 minutes, but yeah, I thought it was an enjoyable ride. So for a reminder, we'll just go into a recap of the story, and then we'll just talk about particular points and any issues, and see if we can get more Blu-ray sales for Warner Brothers. So yeah, let's go into a recap of the story. So following the defeat of Enchantress, the Joker and Harley Quinn break up. Recovering from the abusive relationship, Harley blows up the Ace chemical plant where she first pledged herself to the Joker. At a nightclub owned by the gangster Roman Sionis, Harley cripples Roman's driver and is later rescued from an attempted abduction by the club singer Diana Lance. The effort earns Diana a job as Roman's new driver. Meanwhile, GCPD detective Renee Montoya is investigating a series of mob killings carried out by the Crossbow Killer. She finds Harley's necklace at the Ace Chemicals explosion, noting that Harley is now in danger without the Joker's protection. Roman sends Dinah and Victor Zsasz to retrieve a diamond embedded with the bank account numbers to the fortune of the Bertinelli crime family, but pickpocket Cassandra Cain steals the diamond from Zsasz, is arrested, and swallows the diamond. While on the run, Harley is captured by Roman's men and offers to recover the diamond in exchange for keeping her life. Roman agrees, but also puts out a bounty on Cassandra. Harley decides to break Cassandra out of the GCPD, and the two escape to Harley's apartment above a Chinese restaurant owned by Doc. But Doc soon sells out Harley after being offered lots of money by lots of people. Harley's apartment is bombed by criminals looking for Cassandra, and she calls Roman to offer her in exchange for his protection. They agree to meet at an abandoned amusement park. Dinah tells Montoya about the meeting, but Zsasz notices her text message and tells Roman. Devastated by the betrayal, Roman dons his black mask and heads to the park. Victor Zsasz arrives and is later killed by Helena, leaving Montoya, Helena, Dinah, and Harley in a standoff until they realize Roman has arrived with a small army. The women fight off Roman's goons, but Cassandra is captured by Roman. Dinah uses her metahuman ability to scream at supersonic levels, allowing Harley to chase Roman on roller skates to a nearby pier, where Cassandra plants a grenade on Roman and kills him. After destroying Roman's criminal empire, Montoya quits the GCPD and joins Dinah and Helena to become vigilantes known as the Birds of Prey. Harley pawns the diamond and uses the money to start her own business with Cassandra. The end. So, yeah, I was thinking, like, I didn't think this going into, but after I left the cinema and kind of went on with my life, I was thinking, you've got, like, even before we get into like the details of the story, just a difference in the reaction between the last DC film Joker and Birds of Prey. And I heard somewhere an interesting kind of point about the difference in reaction that both got. And when the Joker came out, because both films have protagonists that are sort of quote unquote bad people, but the reaction from the Joker was really negative in terms of how it had a bad person as a protagonist, whereas it didn't. Birds of Prey didn't quite get that reaction. So I was kind of thinking, and the point that was made is that was the shift in tone all that's needed, because Joker was quite a serious film, Birds of Prey not so serious, and the perception was a lot different. So what did you think of the difference in reaction, or lack of reaction in Birds of Prey, like to a film where the character is still a killer and kind of a psychopathic killer, if I to use that term?
I think there's several reasons that Birds of Prey did not get the same sort of backlash that Joker did. The Joker was kind of like, we all know the Joker. Everyone knows the Joker. Not as many people know Harley Quinn's character. They just know of her. She's kind of like just this, and she's like super colorful. It's kind of like, I don't know, like everyone has a different sort of view of her, how they've been introduced to her. And also, Birds of Prey was coming off the back of a crap film. Okay, not a crap film. I actually enjoyed it. But what most people see as not a great film. So the sort of like tone of it is like from that, whereas the Joker was coming from a completely different angle. It wasn't coming off the back of anything other than obviously the Joker's previous perceptions and countless other things.
Yeah, sort of bigger prior knowledge.
Yeah. But this was literally coming off a film that, didn't necessarily do great. There was not much seriousness in it. And as well, the last thing is, I I don't think people take the idea of a female like crazy killer as seriously as a male crazy killer, which I think is one of the reasons why this film was so good.
I think for me, looking at the Joker, a lot of people were saying it was justifying and romanticizing his actions, and they were saying it was kind of glamorizing that violence. And I sometimes wonder if those people watch the same film as me, because watching the Joker, a lot of the things he did, you're not supposed to sympathize with the way he's handling things. When he's on that TV show, you can see the reaction of the audience and the TV host. You aren't supposed to think what he's doing is justified at all. But people seem to, and some of the negative press I'd seen, seem to think that it was somehow romanticizing it. But if you make the violence slapstick and comedy, then somebody doing something very horrific, like deciding they don't like someone, so breaking both of their legs, because it's presented as in a slapstick way, somehow that doesn't get anywhere near the same level of criticism. So having a different tone just really, really changes the level to which people think it needs analysing or think it needs a judgment placed upon it, I think. And yeah, I've heard a lot of things about both films which I found surprising, to say the least.
Okay. I think Birds of Prey as well. I think the Joker has a lot of like guns, whereas even though there is probably equally the amount of guns in Birds of Prey, I mean, they're not. I'm trying to think of when they're used. But there's
a lot of non-lethal comedy violence in Birds of Prey.
Yeah,
but there's still the occasional moment. Yeah, there's the occasional moment, and Harley does feed somebody to a hyena.
Yeah,
that's.
But yeah, I think that like difference between like having like a quite a serious like a serious gun, and then like Harley Quinn comes in with like I don't know what that is, but with the colourful.
Yeah, I don't know what you call that. Is
smoke bombs. Sequence. Some of them were glitter bombs, like. So even though she's firing a weapon at them, it's a non-lethal, and I feel like up until the end, there's like not much. It's a lot of physical violence, like contact violence. That's the one.
Yeah, no, I get that. I did think it was just interesting how, like you said, the tone, the shift in tone could make watching not the same, because the sequences weren't the same, but just violence and excessive violence in places like okay, and like you say, not warranting sort of further examination. Where in the film there is like people get hurt and people get are killed or blown up or fed to wild animals, but it's just taken as comedy.
Yeah. Also, they don't hang up on any of the violence in Harley Quinn. Kind of something violent happens, and they're like, okay, on to the next bit of violence, or next bit of movie. Whereas the Joker, obviously, it's making a point of the violence. So you spend a lot of time around each violent moment. Whereas with Birds of Prey, like she jumps on his legs and then we're in the next shot. Like it happens and we move on. And like I guess that adds to like the slapstick comedy way of it, but it's you don't linger on it because you're already at the next bit.
Yeah, no, I get that.
If you have a comedy slapstick tone, you can be incredibly violent without it meaning anything at all. That's kind of how humor works in a lot of things. I mean, look at, when you've got sort of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when you have someone whose limbs all get cut off. And because he says, it's but a scratch, or the killer bunny, and that tone definitely obviously has a massive effect on how people critically look at things. But yeah, I think I just found it interesting that people thought Joker was glamorizing something, whereas those moments are quite painful to watch in Joker.
Yeah.
Whereas in Harley, I'm calling it a Harley Quinn movie, I should be calling it Birds of Prey.
Yeah.
We'll talk about, it is her film. she's doing things which are potentially quite life-changing or murdery, and yeah, there are kind of no consequences other than that was funny, sharp cut, next thing.
Yeah.
Saying that though, the way that the film kind of is structured, it makes it seem like there's no consequences, but everything catches up on her, like
karma.
And they do also mention stuff. So like you said, like life-changing things. We're going back to the breaking the legs. They do actually like to point out a lot that that is now like he is now disabled for life. He is now in a wheelchair.
Yeah, they did that. I actually forgot that.
He cannot do his job, like, and it is a massive inconvenience for our villain in this. So it's kind of like it is mentioned, but you just don't focus on. It's just not focused on.
Yeah, like you say, it's kind of like on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's a punchline rather than anything with any emotional weight. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't particularly feel sorry for the driver, even though you don't get the impression he did anything to really warrant it.
Yeah, we didn't even know it.
Yeah, I just feel like he's constantly saying a lot of stuff to other, not just Harley, but girls in general. And then
so he had it coming. He looked at that type of character.
That's just like he could have been really nice. Well, not really nice, but not as bad. But I don't know. I got that vibes. I mean, we was in a club setting.
I don't know. Harley did a lot of things in that club that gave everyone a lot of good reason to hate her.
Yeah.
But that was her character. That was she is a bad person.
Yeah.
But all right, speaking of Harley and her film, I'm going to say it's her film. What did you think of the performance of Margot Robbie in this film?
I feel like somebody asked her to do the voice as if she was doing a voice acting cartoon role. They really dialed it up to kind of cartoonish levels, which I'm not against.
Yeah.
A movie, it can be a live action movie and behave like a cartoon. But everyone else didn't sound like cartoon characters. And I didn't mind it, but I've seen a few people saying that they thought it was quite irritating, and I can kind of understand that reaction to the voice being that kind of cartoon. It was a lot more cartoon and sort of New York, I want to say, sounding than it was
New Jersey.
Yeah, there's a lot more of whatever that was than it was in Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I think I guess part of it comes from. I mean, she was in the whole. To be fair, she was in all of Suicide Squad as well. So my first thinking was that just because we saw her more and we heard her more, but then she did get a whole load of screen time in Suicide Squad. So yeah, I kind of sort of picked up on her voice, especially her voice compared to the other characters who, by and large, just all sounded normal. So it did stand out. I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. Like I said, there was a point of me watching it where I was in for the ride. So kind of accepted the tone, accepted the voice, and to be fair, I enjoyed watching her. I thought she naturally stood out, and played it like very entertainingly. Played her role really well.
Yeah, definitely playing up to the character and making it a bit more extreme and wacky. I do really think that when they were writing this, somebody had seen recently or remembered seeing Tank Girl. There was things to do with the jumpiness of the plot, the narration style, the very, very not like the comic books kind of costuming as well. I was not a fan of the costuming whatsoever. I felt it. No, I can see how they got there, but I really didn't like it. And it just kept making me think, has someone working on this recently seen Tank Girl? Because it felt like it was aiming at that kind of wacky, out there, comic booky tone.
I watched quite a few interviews before watching the film. And So it's interesting that you commented on the accent, because that was mentioned in one of the interviews, how she was trying to get like a balance between the cartoonish kind of Harley Quinn accent to like a more realistic, I think it's like from the Bronx or something. I don't know.
So somewhere around that area.
Somewhere
Showing
around
our
there,
lack of American geography.
Yeah, I know.
We
Yeah.
apologise,
Some-
viewers in the States.
Yeah.
And her original accent that she went for was kind of more realistic, and then she was told like it doesn't quite sound right for Harley. So then she tried to like add more of the like kind of cartoon voice in there. But I do agree, I think it went too cartoon.
Yeah,
It was
maybe that's why the voiceover aspects narrating was so much of that kind of cartoon style. Maybe that's where they added that in, because presumably that narration was something that was captured later in production.
Yeah, maybe. And but yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like she's done a good portrayal, but you can tell that she has only knows Harley Quinn from having this role, rather than, and like has learned, because something else that she said in one of the interviews that I think really shows is that she doesn't really fully understand Harley Quinn's relationship with the Joker, which is why she kind of wanted this film to be how it is.
Yeah.
And I think it shows, because if you've ever been obsessed with anything, or had someone obsessed with you, there's definitely something about any mention of that thing or that person that always will send you certain feelings, regardless of how much you've detached yourself from said thing or person. And I don't think you can ever really break away from that, regardless of how toxic it is to you. And that's kind of like the nature of addiction.
Right. So like she didn't, just her breaking away in itself, I guess, wasn't true to the character. Is that?
No, I
They
feel like
portrayed
you
it a bit more
can-
like a standard breakup, I feel. A very
Okay.
extreme
Yeah.
version of a standard breakup.
Yeah, very extreme.
Like a very dialed up to
it's-
11 version, but not the same as an experience of someone getting away from an abusive
okay.
codependency situation. And that's partly probably because they just didn't want that. I mean, that would make it a completely different movie.
Yeah, yeah.
But even like just down to the fact of like, if the Joker's mentioned, like I think that should send her a little more hysterical, you know? Like maybe she does something a little bit more irrational. Because that was my one thing. I was like, I know you don't understand that relationship from this.
They had enough time jumps. They could easily have put a time jump in that had said that no one had seen Harley for 6 months. To give an idea that maybe she went through a lot of things and now she's coming back, and because people don't believe she's actually broken away from it, she blows up the thing. I felt like they really didn't want to deal with any of those more serious things that are to do with Harley's portrayal, which in the comic books are very much dealt with. I don't know if you've read there's a plot line where Harley vanishes for some time because she's actually pregnant, but she knows the child wouldn't be safe, so she goes away, is pregnant, gives the child away to her cousin, I think it is, and then comes back again and says, Joker didn't even notice I was gone.
I've heard about that.
There's a lot of those things are dealt with a lot more in the comics, and I think for this movie they wanted just those fun elements, and they wanted just the very brightly coloured, shiny, feel-good kind of aspects. And I think they just didn't want to cover it.
Yeah, I feel like they could have added just little hints to it. A bit like, I'm going to go back to Full Metal Alchemist here, because I think they do it really well, that they cover some really, really, really dark topics, but it's also covered in humour. And I feel like they were a bit too cautious
But I was
with
thinking
Harley Quinn around that.
it also felt like they tried really hard not to put the Joker in this film any more than was necessary to sort of get it started. And I kind of, if I use a comparison to Spider-Man Far From Home, there's a lot of, which takes place after Endgame, and there is still a lot of Tony Stark imprint on the world, on the characters. Whereas here, it just felt like they just didn't want the Joker in this to maybe take away from any distraction or anything like that. So that might be part of the reason why they didn't maybe treat the relationship as much, at least on screen, and kind of, this happened. Now let's focus on the Birds of Prey.
Yeah, they already had such a busy cast that they didn't have enough room to flesh out the characters they had. So if they then had to start doing more with characters that weren't relevant to the plot at hand, where were they going to put that? They'd need to add a lot more time onto the runtime to do it, because I already felt like they were rushing through
Definitely
building the other supporting cast as it was. So I think it had to partly be a runtime issue as well, I would assume.
But I still think it could have been added in a way that didn't have to add any extra story, literally just in terms of like acting.
Yeah,
just
little nods, reactions, her going silent, or hints that she'd been hints she'd put herself through loads of therapy or been away or something like that.
Some more like gritted teeth moments, maybe, just like
or even just
times
she
that
could
the
have had
Joker's mentioned and it's like
she
doesn't
reaction.
even like flinch. And I'm like, no. I was give up dairy, and if someone like walks past with some cheese I react.
Yeah, she could have lasered her tattoos off as well.
Yeah.
Like they could have been or tattooed over them or changed something like that, rather than, because all she did was throw away a necklace and cut her hair shorter.
Yes,
have a little bit poster with a few knives in it, mate. That would have been I would have had a teddy with his face in it.
That's good, like good to know, Tazziii. It's good. I'm learning a lot about you here.
I've been through like less serious breakups and had more of a like
reaction.
Yeah, come on.
Because I think she would have lasered those tattoos off. I was expecting them, because the tattoos were such a prominent bonding moment for them, I was expecting them to have done something, to have lasered them off or changed them or put a cross through them, or said not anymore underneath Daddy's little monster on that tattoo. So I was surprised that was another way they could have easily, visually in a few shots, shown her breaking away.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, like you mentioned, sort of the supporting cast and not having enough time to sort of get into them. But what did you think of the other members of the cast and their roles in the film? Because I did get that impression also, that there was a lot of focus on Harley Quinn, naturally, because it was her film, but particularly in the early stages, like I was saying before, that I was kind of sat there, and because of the jumping around and the way the narrative was done, it just left me thinking, kind of like, who are these people really, and what do they want? And that, for me, hurt some of the viewing early on, because I couldn't latch on to anything in terms of like motivation. Although I did like some of the cast. Well, what did you all think about the other cast members and how they were portrayed?
I think they had too many.
Too many.
I think that you could have focused on everyone a bit better if you'd had maybe one less person involved. I felt like Huntress was very much a plot device for a lot of it.
Yeah, it did feel like that. Particularly the way her backstory was shown. So I felt no one really got much of a backstory. She got the most of any, but it was done in a very kind of sort of tell and not show, even though visually they showed it. So, for example, Black Canary had a bit of a backstory where she was approached by Montoya to help in her case, and she referenced her mother. But that was very much a case of here's her backstory. We're just going to exposition dump on that. So, she has a backstory, and then move on. And Huntress got a bit more because we saw the scene of her family being sort of slain. But yeah, I didn't feel that there was much characterization, and we didn't really get any, like, I didn't feel empathy, I guess. It just felt like
Well,
I was
we
being
got a
told.
splash screen and a montage,
Yeah,
and things felt a little bit cliche because of that. Somebody saying, "I won't help the police because the police didn't help my mother."
pretty
Um,
much.
it,
Yes.
it just was a way of hinting that she had some kind of power.
Yeah.
That was all it was really there for. It didn't add hugely in a lot of ways. They'd kind of just dropped those lines in, and it was more sort of Easter egg feeling than feeling like it was really adding a huge amount of depth, because they never mentioned it again.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I didn't even know. I've heard the words Black Canary, but didn't know what that meant. Like, I didn't know who that was, and then so that, like, just line drop. It was really weird. It was like, does she have powers then? I feel like you could have just scrapped all that. Just had Harley saying about she's got a killer voice.
Okay.
And just kept on that kind of route without the
Well, they
mum
hinted
thing.
it with
And then,
the glass exploding in the glass, so we already knew that.
but they could have just left it at that without the, like, additional police thing. And then Huntress, it was like, I don't know, like, she's got this somewhat, like, this what seems to be a really interesting backstory, and it's just kind of like like, flick through the pages. That's the only way I can really describe it.
Yeah, I actually get
Put
that.
the Rocky music over her, kind of like she was
Yeah.
trained and she didn't like these people, and she's crossing out like names on a children's drawing, and it was a little bit Rocky montage. I felt
And it
in
was
places.
like, oh, this would be cool, but there's just not enough time for it to be cool. It was like they're kind of lining up to have a next movie, and they were like, how can we use this to, like, if we want to make another one, if we want to make a sequel, like, how can we set things up for it?
Yeah, I get it. But in saying that, I did mention sort of Huntress' backstory, or sort of lack thereof, but I did actually like her character. I sort of liked her, just her ability in just taking out all these guys, but also her awkwardness and her awkwardness with the others, but then the others' acceptance of her awkwardness, speaking as an awkward person. I appreciated that.
It's kind of like, that's how you are, like.
Yeah, that's cool.
And we like you.
Yeah. So,
What did you guys make of Cassie being a completely new character unrelated to the comic books? Because I was quite frustrated that they could have just called her something else, because now we can't have Cassie in the movies because she's been effectively retconned.
Because this was brought up by Gail Simone, who there's a writer in the comics, that she was sort of disappointed with her character, and she was saying that it could have just been another person. So I guess my thought was, well, why would they not make it another person if because it's not like you're changing. I mean, I don't know how. Yeah, I was just confused that why would they not make it another person?
Yeah, I felt it was a strange choice, because Cassie's, like, with the comic book fans, although she's not known by, sort of people that just watch movies or just consume the TV series and things so much, but with the comic book fans, Cassie's quite a liked character. Cassandra Cain is Batgirl for a bit, and she has a very cool costume, and she's kind of a dark, brooding Batgirl. And
This was a completely different character.
Oh yeah, this had no relation whatsoever. You can look at people like Dinah's character and say, okay, that isn't Black Canary from the comic books, but it is a Black Canary.
Yeah.
And the same with Huntress. Huntress, I mean, she's had a few different origin stories. She's been done a few times in the comics, but that is pretty similar to various versions of Huntress in the comic books. Harley Quinn, a different version of Harley Quinn, but she's clearly Harley Quinn. So it was quite a weird choice to do that, rather than just make her something completely fresh and new, because now everyone's going to judge it thinking in the back of their minds, if they're a comic book fan, and now we'll never actually get Cassandra Cain.
Yeah.
It's a comparison they didn't need to put themselves up against, because I think it makes it harder to judge what they've actually made.
I guess, that's what I was trying to think of before, where in terms of like movie-going audiences, it's not like it's a known character, so it's not like they had to do this. They could have just literally just kept
Any
everything the
name.
same and given her any name, and then you would have upset no one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was a strange decision.
Was anyone else highly, highly, highly irrationally frustrated that the hyena was called Bruce, or was that just me?
Just you. I thought it was funny.
I was
I-
And
okay
the
with
reason
that.
why they only had one hyena, it all makes perfect sense. But then again, the interviews before really helped with that.
Yeah,
Because
I
they
was
Maybe you
just
should
just,
couldn't
start doing
afford.
that.
They could only afford to have one CGI
it was CGI'd
hyena.
over an actual dog, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they could only afford like one. Really expensive apparently to CGI a hyena.
It's nicely done. It had a lot of
Um,
character, that hyena.
It
Yeah,
did.
it did.
It was
I was
cute.
glad it
And then I
survived.
kind of liked the kind of like hint of like, we know that Harley thinks like Batman's hot, like everyone does,
Yeah.
right?
He hints at it a lot.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, oh, I named him after that hunk, like, and it was kind of showing that she's open to other possibilities after the Joker, which I think was a nice little touch, and also
Yeah.
made him her pet, which I thought was funny.
It's completely irrational on my part, but it just I think it's partly because I love the hyenas so much. I mean, one of my plans for retirement is to get 2 huge Alsatian dogs and call them Bud and Lou. So
Aww.
it was one of those things for me that I was just kind of like, it just gave me a completely irrational, unjustified twitch that there was only one hyena, even though my brain told me, and you have now confirmed, budget was the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at least they hinted towards like, did they, or did I make it up? I hinted towards like her getting more hyenas. Like she's kind of got a love now.
That would be good, because it would make, you know, it's one of those things which distracted me through the movie that really shouldn't have.
Yeah, I wanted to comment as well on like the fact that how these like characters work together. So even though in terms of backstory and pointing out who the characters are, which I think was done way better than Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
But
I'll give you that.
the way the characters were as a whole together as a group was something that I thought was really nice and refreshing, because obviously this was a badass all girls group, and there were a lot of moments in this film that you could tell that women were at the head of making this, and I can see some of my male friends having points where they're a little bit uncomfortable at some situations, and then me and my female friends telling them that, yeah, can relate, and them getting really upset because it's just something that they don't have to put up with, and so might not realize how normal it is when it shouldn't be. So the scene in the club where Black Mask makes the girl take off her dress.
Yeah.
Not shocking. It kind of was like very fitting of the scene. And I liked how they made the rest of the characters very awkward in that situation.
Yeah, that did get very tense.
Making the music cut out and stuff like that.
Yeah, and considering
to show it.
how slapstick this film was, it was one of the few like very serious points that they kind of like sat on and let you think about that one.
Before they then blew him up with a grenade.
Grenade, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so back to that was the one moment, not a grenade, the club scene where it was weird for me, just like again tonally, particularly for that character, because he came off like very slapstick to then have that very serious and awkward moment.
Yeah, and then at that point, I was like, he's an arsehole.
Yeah, so
oh my god.
So yeah, it was just like a weird kind of transition in tone, but I'm going to mention that character again.
Yeah. The other moments that I found hilarious and like very, yeah, this is a female cast and a lot of females are involved with this. There's a point where Harley changes into her skates, and Black Widow goes, "When did she have time to have a shoe change?" And
I don't think it was the shoe change for me. It was the hairband.
Yeah, and I was just about to say the next bit was the hairband. And she's just like, "Oh God, like this hair." And I was like, "Do you need a hairband?" Yes, because there's a lot of times, I don't know about for you, Bex, but when I'm watching, especially an action movie, and I'm like, their hair and makeup is too perfect. And it's like, it would be causing me so much problems. How? And then I was like, nice, I'm happy.
Well, as someone with super short hair, I've never had to consider that.
Yeah, as somebody in the goth community, a lot of us have got long hair, so this kind of thing happens in clubs in a regular basis. Someone's dancing and someone else will give them a hairband. So yeah, that's pretty common across the board in sort of the metal and the goth clubs anyway. So I could relate to that bit, especially since it was in a sort of like, it was in a carnival type situation, but it reminded me a bit of clubs.
Yeah. So I guess I mean, I don't know if we're necessarily going to push any more Blu-rays out of this, but I was interested to know, just looking back on recent DC entries, where do you think this film like ranks in terms of recent DC movies, and how do you think DC are doing in general, particularly since Suicide Squad and that period of films?
I think DC need to listen to everyone everywhere who is saying, you make amazing animated things. You don't sort of have as much close control over what happens with the animated ones. You tend to let the directors do their own thing a bit more. And those are all amazing. And the movies, they keep trying different things. And I find it difficult to even compare the DC movies to each other, because they are so vastly different. Look at the tone and the style of something like Aquaman versus this versus Batman versus
Joker.
Superman. And I think that they're seeing that where they have given a bit more creative control to the directors, you look at something like Joker and you look at, although some parts of Birds of Prey does seem jumpy and does have some tonal switches and things, it's still a lot more cohesive than Suicide Squad was.
Yeah.
And I think if they just let people have a bit more control over that movie and let them be a bit more standalone and a bit more contained with a bit more freedom, then they're going to make better movies. Because I honestly can't rank them, because I just don't. I feel like I'm comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, yeah, Suicide Squad is definitely at the bottom, but yeah, from there it's like, where do you put them?
I'm definitely like more impressed with DC at the moment, and I'm looking forward to them making good movies. And like, I like completely agree with you, Bex. Like, just let the directors have more creative freedom, give them bigger budgets as well, so that we can have two hyenas.
That would
more
just
money
enough
for
budget for the extra hyena. That would help me so much, even though it's such a stupid thing I shouldn't care about. But at least in this, they had the action sequences, the fight sequences, lovely choreography. We had some of that roller derby stuff in there, even if I would have preferred the costumes to be a bit more in keeping with the roller derby costumes in the comic books, because I felt like she stood out too much from the world around her. She stood out more in this film compared to normal people than she does currently in the comic book, because she was so brightly coloured, sort of late 80s, early 90s party girl raver kind of look they had going there.
And her alone, because everyone else's wardrobe was quite muted in comparison in particular.
Yeah, she couldn't sneak around. And it made sense at the beginning of the movie, where she was just walking around like she was invincible because no one would touch her because she was with Joker. But I would have liked to have seen things like that get be addressed and changed a little bit as things went on. But yeah, a little bit more budget so we can have even more of that action, because they've shown that they can do really lovely choreography and planning with it, really inventive in that how in the Hall of Mirrors and those giant hands and all the bits of the set moving. And
that scene was so well done.
Yeah, loads of good stunts and things like that. And I'd love to see more of that, because that was a really good blend of comic book mentality and bringing something into the real world.
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway was I agree with what you're saying, and just seeing their willingness to sort of branch out into those adult-rated standalone films as well is actually might be a good space for them, because obviously we've seen the success of Joker. I thought Birds of Prey was a entertaining film, and for me it showed some promise of what could be in future. So I'm more optimistic about DC films definitely than I was maybe this time last year.
Yeah, I think they've got more opportunity to make something strong if they do that. Because you look at things like Aquaman and the standalone Wonder Woman movie, the first one, and things like that. They're nice comic book movies. There's nothing wrong with them, but they aren't. There's no particular aspect of them that makes them stand out. They're just well put together examples of what they are. Origin story comic book movies. And I enjoyed watching them, but they I think they have a better run at making something that actually stands out if they veer off in a slightly different direction, and just be a bit braver, I think, with their choices.
Okay. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. So yeah, I mean, let us know what you think. If you've seen it and you want to kind of give us your thoughts, you can get in touch at feedback@mayamada.com, and yeah, we'll read your comments out in a future episode. So we're going to move on, and I'm just going to talk a bit about some things I picked up in the film, and sort of give a tip, storytelling tip you might want to keep in mind depending on what kind of stories you're looking to create.